Everything was imagined before it was created. Everything begins as a fiction.
I am delighted and excited to have with me today Carissa Carter and Scott Doorley from Stanford's famous D.school, authors of the recently out, hot off the press, Assembling Tomorrow, a guide to designing a thriving future.
The D.school is a place where we try to understand what is a design approach to making things in the world.
We wrote this book to call attention both to the urgency of the unsettling moment that we're in and to pave a path forward that any of us can take on.
How do we prepare ourselves to make changes when we inevitably get things wrong, which we know we will based on history?
We feel that it's an unsettling time to be a human, let alone a maker bringing new things into the world. Do we like how we look in that moment? What might we want to change about how we're building now?
It's never just dystopia, utopia. It's some sort of mundane, interesting future with positives and negatives. There's a need to sort of trade confidence for curiosity.
It may be that what we have is a world not on the verge of flying apart, but an uncreated one, still in shapeless fragments, waiting to be put together properly.
Hello and welcome to another brilliant Sparks talk from the guys at the Global Innovation Forum. I am delighted and excited to have with me today Carissa Carter and Scott Doorley from Stanford's famous D.school. And you guys, you're authors of the recently out, hot off the press, Assembling Tomorrow, a guide to designing a thriving future, which we're going to be talking a little bit about and some of the great concepts and provocations within the book. But first of all, welcome to Sparks.
Thank you, Tom. So great to be here.
Thanks, Tom.
Brilliant. Well, great to have you both. I wonder if we could just start maybe with you, Carissa. Just how did you kind of, in a bit of a nutshell, how did you come to be working at the D.school? How did you come to start writing this book and teaming up with Scott?
Yeah, the D.school, we're an institute at Stanford that serves the entire university. So students come to us both to major or get a graduate degree in design, but also from every one of Stanford's 7 schools. So they might be business or education students or med students or engineers. It's a really highly interdisciplinary place. And myself, my original career was as a scientist. I was a geologist.
Oh.
And so I was something else before I was a designer. And I think that interdisciplinarity is kind of emblematic of what we see design as at the D.school.
Fantastic. And what about you, Scott?
Yeah, I had a similar circuitous route to the D.school, which most of the people, frankly, who work there and also the students who come to the D.school, they often have a career that isn't totally a straight line. So I worked in movies, and while I was working in movies, I was actually doing visual design on the side and web design. And I saw a movie, which I won't get into, that just felt like it was designed to me in the way that it was made. And instead of looking at that and being like, I want to do that, I thought, I want to understand how somebody learned to do that. And that sort of drew me out to the D.school, because the D.school is a place where we try to understand what is a design approach to making things in the world, and how does that benefit, or what are the issues with that, and how can we teach people to create things with intention.
Scott and I both have these very different backgrounds, and now we work and we teach people how to design, how to make things, whether they be products, experiences, or systems, and bring them into the world. And even to us in the business of teaching people, we feel that it's an unsettling time to be a human, let alone a maker bringing new things into the world. Our climate's in dire straits. We're able to edit genetic code. We release algorithms that can learn and make decisions on their own. And it can feel like all of this is happening to us. But, we're makers and we teach design, and we know how much agency all of us have. So we wrote this book to call attention both to the urgency of the unsettling moment that we're in and to pave a path forward that any of us can take on.
Yeah, I would say the original impetus for the book, which started probably 4 or 5 years ago, was to talk about how different this time was. And while we were writing it, so many things happened that just kind of proved how different this time was, that we started to think about, well, what makes it different and what can we all do about it?
You started it pre ChatGPT launching to the world and generative AI, obviously not pre-generative AI, but pre this sort of massive takeoff. And this idea of the runaway train, the sort of we've unleashed something that we're not entirely sure where it's going to go. Again, that feels like a really central sort of point of the book. What are kind of your attitudes to that? Are you feeling optimistic, hopeful? Are you feeling scared? Are you feeling, where is humanity going from your perspective?
I mean, I'll kick this off and would love Scott's take on it too. I think we are feeling like we should be paying attention to why things feel like they're on the fritz.
Okay.
And that really honing in on seeing the unseen is key to making this better future. But we are very optimistic that we have the tools to do so.
Yeah.
I think too, just the question that you asked, isn't it great that we're asking those questions right now? It was something along the lines of like, where is humanity headed? That's a big question. And it just feels like we're at a moment where that's a really important question to answer, because the things we're making with are accelerating. They change, algorithms and what we call artificial evolution or synthetic biology. These are things that are different technologies. You put them out into the world, then they continue to change on their own. That's a really new thing, and it could have compounding impacts that could be good or bad, will be good or bad, frankly, good and bad. And, what are we going to do? How are we going to adjust? How do we prepare ourselves to make changes when we inevitably get things wrong, which we know we will based on history?
One of the ways I think that's so interesting one of the techniques, let me kind of put it that way in the book, is to use fiction to explore some of these possible futures. I think that's a really interesting approach that we can learn from, not just in narrative sort of format, but in our way of thinking about possible futures. Could you talk about the impetus to do that and how it's been received and how you use it?
Yeah, I mean the simplest thing to do is look around at the table you're sitting at or the chair you're in and pick up something, anything that's human made. Have a marker right here. Absolutely everything was imagined before it was created.
Yeah.
Everything begins as a fiction. And in the same way that you have to dream it up before you can make it, we can use that skill to try on situations in the future that use some of these tricky technologies. We call them mischievous materials, these types of algorithms and genetic code that we're able to edit. If we write stories where we're trying on moments in the near future that incorporate these technologies, we can see if that's the world we want to build. And that's a device that all of us can use, no matter if you are somebody that is actually writing the code in one of these technologies, or if you're a leader in an organization, or you're an entrepreneur dreaming up a new product idea. Trying on futures with stories, with these fictions, is a device that we all can use. And we've got 20 stories across our very much nonfiction book. We have 20 fictional futures to try on in different ways. And they become these devices of conversation about like, well, do we like how we look in that moment? What might we want to change about how we're building now?
Say, and it's also, it allows you to think about, because some of us are relentlessly optimistic or relentlessly pessimistic, and that depends on how you come at these things, as we touched on before. but it allows you to try on different futures, as you're saying, and different ways of thinking about the outcomes that we frankly can't foresee, right? We're ignorant of where this stuff all goes.
Yeah, and we really can't, right? Because it is the future. It hasn't happened yet. It's not like we're reading history and not and trying to make sense of what already happened. But I think this idea of trying on is a really important one because it both allows you to try on possibility. It allows you to kind of bring the future down to size. When we're in a moment, we tend to project as if one thing we're noticing right now becomes the thing that's going to shape everything forever. And then what you get are these like sort of dystopian or utopian views because you're kind of projecting out this momentary thing. You know, I mean, 4 years ago, we might have been having a conversation about how, you know, the metaverse is going to change everything and da, 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 da. And like, of course, yes, there will be some metaverse stuff. There's going to be some useful things, but it's not going to be the end all be all, right? So the ability to just kind of try these on and play them out a little bit to see not sort of where we're speculating on, but how's that going to change day-to-day life? What's it going to feel like if X, Y, or Z happens? There's a really interesting sort of sub-story about how the internet got created. There was a group of people, a guy named Ted Nelson, who was a researcher, who was trying to create an alternate version of the internet. And his basic idea was that everything would be tracked so that anyone creating anything, it would be clear where that came from. So you'd get sort of like a trail of, whoa, this person made it first and then that person altered it. And that sounds great, right? Like even if you think of how AI models are created right now, they're using so many people's efforts. It'd be great to be able to track that, maybe get them paid. But then when you also start playing it out, there's some weird side effects. So in a sense, that would turn every single thing online into a monetary transaction.
Yeah.
Is that something we want? You know, just like passing things along. Don't we want some things to not involve money or not incremental payments? And, you know, you're going to think about motivation differently that way. So you have to like play these things out to really get into the detail of what could be. And it's never just dystopia, utopia. It's some sort of mundane, interesting future with positives and negatives.
Can I come back to that point you made at the beginning, Carissa, particularly about well, both of you, about the interdisciplinary nature of Stanford, of D.school at Stanford? Because it seems to me that part of the way of seeing some of those different futures is to involve different perspectives. And if all you have is people who are very well schooled, I mean, the classic kind of MBA, say, then they're not going to see things from the point of view of the environment, or they're not going to see things from the point of view of wider sort of social communities, perhaps. And so I do think that interdisciplinary skill set and bringing people together must be such an important part of being purposeful and being more mindful of where we go.
I think oh, go ahead.
Well, I guess how does that sort of, how is that coming through? How are places like the D.school really the sort of the birthplace of this new movement?
I mean, I like to think of it like if you wear glasses or you go to the eye doctor, you've been and you wear that, you know, they put that big device in front of your eyes at some point, and the different lenses with different, you know, focus, you know, prescription focuses flash in front of you, and they say, does it look better now or now? Is it better now or now? Right. And you go through like 100 different options of what might make something come crystal clear for you.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one way to think about what interdisciplinarity does for us in our work, because we all have our way of sensing the world. Our human nature is to believe that my experience is the experience, right? But then clearly you talk to a neighbor, a family member, and they've experienced the same thing, but from their own perspective. And the reality is, like, we will never be able to experience it all. But if we can overlay each other's experiences, and that's what our book is aiming to do, is give you a bunch of tools to figure out where that focus is. The idea of seeing a lot of these unsettling feelings that are unseen and bringing them into focus, in that interdisciplinarity is one way you can do that.
One of the themes at the Global Innovation Forum over the past few years has been inclusivity and diversity within your teams and within your innovation teams, and asking the question, who are we missing? And I think that, when it comes to any sort of innovation, but particularly these frankly world-changing innovations, must be things that we ask. How can we get as many different perspectives in the room as possible?
I think there's a fundamental thing underneath that, which is it's a difference in mindset of not like, how can we be confident about what we're doing, but how can we understand where we are, and saying, who and what are we missing? As soon as you go to that frame, which I think is really important, because even if you've got a lot right, things are changing so quickly that you're eventually going to have something wrong.
Yeah.
But if you go to that mindset, then having a diverse group of people is the obvious thing to do. Like, it's not like it's very clear that that's needed, because if you have a little bit of humility, you start to understand what you're missing. If you understand what you're missing, you have to recruit everybody to work on it.
Yeah. We've Sun's law, right? All of the best people work for, or most of the best people work for someone else. But that brings me to another fascinating part of the book, which is this idea of metaphors and how they shape our world and how we think. And I think, as you say, there are sort of current metaphors in action. When we've spoken before about AI, maybe Scott, you could elaborate both on the concept of this sort of metaphorical framing of the world, and also how that is influencing some of these technologies at the moment.
Yeah, I think this is one of the things when we were doing research for the book that came up as just so delightful. And it's the kind of thing where once you dig into it, it's so obvious that this is how we think, but we don't often kind of call it out. So the basic idea is, and there's a bunch of research on this from the 1980s onward, of both why we have metaphors. They come out of physicality. It's very interesting. When you talk about wisdom, you're usually talking about things that are up. Like, oh, he's very learned. He's, his ideas come from on high, and so there are these weird things. And then when you talk about things that are like, when your mood is down, it's low. I'm feeling low, right? So they're very core. The way we think and the way we describe things are just totally core to humankind and just the way we think. So once you start thinking about that, you can see that we're always framing things. We're just constantly making sense of one thing relative to another. And then once you start thinking about that, you can see how, as these technologies emerge, different people are using different metaphors. And those metaphors really highlight and hide what you notice. So if you just run down the list of metaphors for, say, generative AI and ChatGPT, it's everything from calculator for words to nuclear energy to it's the dawn of electricity or the printing press. I heard a great one that was, it's like rug manufacturing. We need to think about this as manufacturing for cognitive work, So as you're thinking about, right, as you're thinking about each of these things, they start to really color what you see as an opportunity, what you see as a concern. And I think what we're saying in that idea of what am I missing as a driving question, it's not about getting the metaphor right. It's about trying on different metaphors so you can constantly see what you're missing, see if there's an opportunity that might be in a different way of thinking about it. Also listening to how other people are describing it, because you can start to understand where they're coming from. So just these thinking in metaphors and noticing the metaphors you're using, it's a really useful tool.
That can be practiced too, right? You think about your own organization and you say to yourself, all right, if my organization was a river, right? What would the rapids be? What part of it? What part would be carrying the sediment down? Who or what would the eddies on the side be? What would the banks be made of? And then try on a new one. If my organization was a solar system, right? Like, what would the sun be? What are the asteroids that are flying around? What's a moon? Was a planet and is no longer allowed to be a planet? Like when you use the metaphor, you use the specifics of it to give to give shape into, like, each time you see a new aspect of it.
I love it. I both on both the insight into how it shapes how we think, and as you say, we can't experience things in the future. We're ignorant of where we're going, so we have to build it on our own experiences or historical sort of experiences. And equally, I love the thought of, actually, why don't you put yourself in different ways of thinking? I think those are two really powerful, both a kind of way of thinking and an insight into how we think. Were there any things, as you were creating it, as you were putting it together, that were surprising to you, I guess, that you hadn't really come across, that were either sparked by one another or in a kind of wonderful moment of creative collaboration? What surprised you by the end?
That's a great question. Well, there was both, like, process surprises, I think, as well as content
Okay.
surprises. Process wise, Scott touched on it a little bit, where he was saying how, we're writing this really 2021, 2022 is when we did the bulk of the writing, because so much was happening with generative AI at that time. It felt like a lot of the fictional stories we were crafting were coming true as we were writing
Mm.
them. We probably have at least double the number of stories that are in the book, and some of them we cut because it's
Yeah.
like, well, that's no longer the future, that has happened. So I think, like, that, because we were so immersed in it, it was surprising how fast it felt like it was happening.
Amazing.
And then one that I'll share content wise, and then pass it to Scott, is that the first half of our book is really about these intangible forces that feel like they're making today feel really unsettling. And two of those forces are interconnection and flow, which are about how everything in the world is connected and connects to everything else. And
Yes.
then two of these forces are within our own selves. They're about feelings and our ability our tendency to use make believe. And I think, like, for me, that, like, outward look and this inward look as to, like, why things feel unsettling, I love that we landed there as the frame, because I
Yeah.
think this is both outside and within us.
Lovely. Thank you, Carissa.
Yeah, related to all that too. I mean, I think we've been talking about, why is this happening right now? Like, what are all those ingredients coming together? And there are many, but a couple. One is the idea that we're reaching limits, and you can see it in the environment. That's a very clear one to see. It's like, well, for a long time we felt like resources are unlimited. We're so small we can't possibly affect the planet, but now we are, right? And I feel we're approaching one of those with our nervous systems too. It just feels like the amount of media we intake and the amount of information that's coming in. I mean, I cannot even handle my inbox anymore. It's so
Yeah.
much stuff just to process, and so, like, we're sort of reaching the limits of our brain. And so then the questions are, well, when you're in an environment where you're reaching limits, how do you need to work differently? I think there's a fundamental difference that we need to do. And the other thing, which Carissa mentioned, is just the profundity of pace. Like, just the matter of doing things quicker changes their nature completely. So
Yeah.
we were giving a talk the other day and talking about artificial evolution or synthetic biology, where we can program the base layer
CRISPR and
code.
things like that.
Yeah, we can basically program nature rather than selective breeding and that kind of thing. And we got challenged by an audience member who said, isn't that just breeding? It's just like high technology breeding. And I was like, yeah, but it's going so much faster, and doesn't speed matter? And he was like, I
Yes.
don't know, doesn't it? I was like, well, would you want to get bumped by a car going 1 mile an hour or a car going 100 miles an
Yeah.
hour? It's
Yeah.
a different thing. And I think we need to just understand that, like, this pace of change alone is something we're grappling with.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what are the ways that we can focus on that specifically?
Maybe just to wrap up, I think so many important themes and areas we've covered, and as I say, the book is assembling tomorrow, and do pick it up. It's as great read, and as the guys say, sort of intersperses some really well thought through factual sort of explorations at this point in time we're at, with some incredibly provocative and evocative fictional stories to bring this possible futures to life. But maybe you can leave our audience and myself with something we could think about or do on the back of it. Just one thing that we can take away after listening to this talk today. I don't know who I throw that to first, but yeah, one from each of you would be great.
One thought I always love to end with is actually the quote that we begin our book with, because it was a beacon for us as we were writing. And it comes from 1950, which was also a time of nuclear weapons, massive technological change that affect people, our global politics, our environment. It felt very unsettling then, as it does now. And it's from this essay by a woman, Catherine Ann Porter, called "The Future Is Now" in Mademoiselle, 1950. And again, she is reflecting on that time. And what she says is, it may be that what we have is a world not on the verge of flying apart, but an uncreated one, still in shapeless fragments, waiting to be put together properly. And I think that gives us the optimism that even though things may feel astray again now, we all may have one of those fragments, and we're going to make some mistakes along the way. But if we can pay attention to them and notice them and all be a part of building what's next, there's a lot of hope for our future.
Thank you, Carissa. I love that. I will go and scribble that down forthwith. Scott, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I love that quote, because it's so much about, like, what are we trying to do here? And I think related to it, to be able to do that, to be able to find a world that we can put together, to be able to find the opportunities that allow us to make things better rather than letting them fly apart. I think there's a need to sort of trade confidence for curiosity, for lack of a better word. I think we think of, like, leadership, say, is about, picking the right thing and following it and going to the nth degree. And that's not bad. That's good and is needed. But I do feel like there's something about not having necessarily confidence that you're right, but shifting the confidence toward how you figure it out. So confidence that you'll be able to figure it out, that you have the tools you need to move through it, but not maybe that you're starting with the right answer.
So you have to have that confidence to be curious, because it's not a sign of weakness, it's a strength.